Motorcycle manufacturers seem to be pulling us poor consumers in two ostensibly contradictory directions at the moment. On the one hand, they're trying to convince us that we need €25,000, 190 horsepower monsters with wings and dynamic AI-controlled matrix laser headlights, while simultaneously at the other end of the market, downsizing engine capacity and outsourcing production to bring us cheap and cheerful bikes like this, the Royal Enfield Guerrilla, or the star of 2024 in terms of sales in the UK and Europe, the Triumph Speed 400. 450cc, 40-ish horsepower, and a price tag below €6,000. And there are even cheaper and cheerfuller 20 horsepower 350cc models available, like the Royal Enfield Hunter and the Honda Highness. Now, Honda launched the Highness on the Indian market a year or so ago, adamant that it would never be offered in Europe or North America. But guess what? This week they're showcasing the GB350S at the EICMA show in Milan, promising that it has been designed for and will be available in Western markets. Now, if Honda are looking to get a slice of the action, these little bikes need to be taken seriously. So today I'm riding this Guerrilla, 452cc, 40 horsepower, 40 newton meters, and integrated colour sat-nav, s'il vous plaît, all for around €5,500–6,000, depending on which paint job you go for. Bargain of the decade, or just a rough and ready means of transport? And perhaps more importantly, can it steal the crown from the Triumph Speed 400? Now, posting reviews of Royal Enfields always fills me with a little trepidation, as, in all honesty, I haven't been their greatest fan over the years, and naturally this annoys Enfield fanboys, who make their feelings felt in no uncertain terms in the comments section. However, I have to say that first impressions of this Guerrilla are largely positive. I'm not keen on the name, let's get this out of the way at the beginning. It's too aggressive, too conflictual for what is otherwise an unpretentious and mild-mannered bike. They've tried to big it up and make it sound like some kind of Ducati Street Fighter rival, which patently it is not. Second thing with the name is, at least when pronounced with a British accent like mine, the word guerrilla, is almost indistinguishable from a guerrilla, meaning I'd constantly be fighting the urge to tell people that I ride a Royal Enfield Guerrilla, as in a member of a small independent group taking part in irregular fighting, typically against large irregular forces, not the primate. But hey, as a linguist, I'm no doubt overthinking this. Once you're riding a bike, its name is largely incidental. So what is the Guerrilla like to ride? In a word, pleasant. It's a bit difficult to heave it up off the side stand, which is too short, but it's not nearly as bad as the Himalayan I tried a few weeks ago. I've been told by owners that it's easier if you put the bars on full right-hand lock, and I don't doubt that that's true. But Royal Enfield don't make us resort to workarounds like that, just make your side stands a few centimetres longer. Anyway, once you're off and away with the Guerrilla, it's reasonably nimble and reassuringly stable. Push on a bit and again, as with most Enfields at the moment, the budget factory tyres do start to lose their composure, even with only 40 horsepower to put down. But use the bike in the way that it was intended, in cities, fairly low speeds, commuting on main roads and dual carriageways, as well as a bit of gravel like they have in India and here in southern Europe, and it's fine. The engine pulls strongly, doesn't quite feel like 40 horsepower to me, I'd say more like 35. It's got enough grunt for the above mentioned riding, but I wouldn't feel comfortable taking it on a motorway personally, even if technically it could probably cope. The seat is an unusual but comfortable shape. It cups my buttocks like the custom seats you get on cruisers or some scooters. Nice and supportive, but the downside is that you can't wriggle around much to change the pressure points. Now, I took the bike down a few uneven gravel treks to simulate the sort of riding some owners would be doing with the bike, and it coped admirably. I found the rear shock to be on the firm side, but the forks managed to soak up all but the biggest bumps and potholes. You're probably thinking it's unfair of me to take a city bike down a track like this, but my thinking is that if it can cope with these ruts, then urban roads will be a doddle. It's not meant to be an off-roader, of course, but if Mrs. RM got one, for example, I think she'd be able to follow me on my Tiger down tracks like this. If you want something beefier, then go for the Himalayan, which has the same engine and chassis more or less, but which I found more top heavy than this Guerrilla. And as I said, the Himi's side stand is so ridiculously short that Mrs. RM literally can't ride the bike once it's parked. I like the dash a lot. Colour TFT, reasonably large, plenty of information displayed logically and legibly, and integrated sat-nav via your smartphone. Well done, Enfield. This is the kind of modern retro dash that Triumph should be giving us on the 2025 Speed Twin 1200. The only downside, and one that probably only matters to YouTubers like me, is that it's almost impossible to take a photo or video of it in action because of the flicker that the camera picks up. You may have noticed it in these clips. Minor detail, you don't see the flicker at all in person. Fuel consumption, very good. I returned an average of 3.3 litres per 100 kilometres, conversions on the screen now, while I had the Guerrilla, which is actually better than the 3.5 litres per 100 kilometres that I get on my 30 horsepower Honda ADV 350 scooter. It needs to be good though, as tank capacity on the Guerrilla is a fairly miserly 11 litres, so range is going to be around 300 kilometres. I got almost identical consumption figures with the Triumph Speed 400, but that tank holds 13 litres, giving you a useful 60 kilometres or so extra range. Range is important on a commuter bike, as it can make the difference between making it home after work and being stranded on the side of the road. A few negatives now. Sorry, Enfield fanboys. I don't like the way the exhaust looks. It's commendably compact and short, but also quite weedy looking from the back like an old scooter. Sounds okay though, and I guess like the name, how the exhaust looks isn't something you particularly bother about while you're riding. I'm also not a massive fan of this particular paint scheme, which I believe isn't available on all markets, so I can't be the only one. Personal preference, of course, but it just doesn't do it for me. Enfield is very good at catering for all tastes, though, and there are half a dozen colours to choose from. I think I'd probably go for the plain metallic silver at the back here. So far, in all fairness, these have been minor irritations, though, first world problems. I think there are only two real negatives, two genuine bugbears that I came across during the time I was with the bike. First, as I've already mentioned briefly, the tyres. Enfield do tend to cheap out on tyres and fit relatively unknown brands. Yes, these do look the part, semi-knobbly and all, but a tyre's grip, at least in the dry, comes from its compound and structure, which can be expensive to produce, and not from the tread pattern, which is cheap. If I bought a Guerrilla, I'd ask the dealer to swap the tyres out before delivery. The factory rubber isn't dangerous, but it ain't great. Second major disappointment for me was the brakes, more particularly the single disc up front. Now, this is a small capacity bike, small stature, but it still manages to weigh about 185 kilos wet. Now, that's not terrible in itself, but it is 15 kilos more than the Triumph Speed 400, and you can feel that. So it needs good brakes, right? And on paper, they do seem okay. Apart from the single disc thing, I think twin discs should be mandatory on all bikes, but that's another discussion. You do get a 310mm disc with twin pot bi-brake calipers, but whether you're applying the brakes hard or soft, they feel very wooden, as if the pads are made from chipboard. The final moan concerns the mirrors, which I found quite stiff and awkward to adjust, and even when I had found the position, they showed more of my shoulder than they did the road behind, particularly my right shoulder for some reason. To minor gripe though, you could fit some bar end mirrors if it was your bike. You may be thinking at this point that I'm being overly critical, and maybe you've got a point. This is an affordable, unpretentious bike in a market of laser-guided 200 horsepower missiles. Yes, but I don't like manufacturers skimping on brakes and tyres. I would happily pay another, 100, 150 euros for some slightly more premium tyres and bitier brake pads. Thanks for the comfy seats, snazzy paint jobs and colour sat-nav, Royal Enfield, but please don't cheap out on tyres and brakes. Despite the negatives I've highlighted, I do like this little bike and its back to basics mantra. It's refreshingly unpretentious in a world of over-the-top everything, and makes total sense as an urban commuter. I suppose the big question is, should you buy this or the Triumph 400? Well, I can only tell you which one I personally would go for. If you're in the market for a no-frills 400 that can take you just about anywhere with relative ease, in comfort and for a fraction of the cost of a BMW or Ducati Hyper Monster RS, then you should absolutely try out the Guerrilla. But I think that if you then take the Triumph for a test ride, you'll probably end up preferring that. In my opinion, the Triumph looks better, it's finished to an even higher standard, it has a stronger engine, better brakes and tyres, and generally just feels more expensive, more polished, more premium. Hard to put a finger on it, but the Speed to me looks and feels like a bike from the price category above. There's no wonder it's been such a big seller since it was launched at the beginning of the year. The Guerrilla represents a sterling effort by Royal Enfield and makes for a very valid competitor that you should absolutely shortlist. But for me, the Triumph still occupies top spots. I'd buy one, except that I wouldn't because I have no need for a 400, but you know what I mean. Anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments which cheap and cheerful bike of the moment you'd go for. Or are you more of a 200 horsepower hyper machine kind of person? Whichever you may be and wherever you are in the world, safe riding and thanks for watching.